Welcome back to Sports on Tap. I'm your host, Rob Troutman, and my next guest joins us on the RRT Productions hotline where his experience is second to none. He's been in the business a long time, where he's the three-time Associated Press Best Sports Columnist in Ohio, contributing writer for the Associated Press, and lastly, he is a sports writer for the Medina Gazette. He is Brian Dulik, and Brian, thanks for taking time to join us here tonight.
Rob, it's always nice to speak with you. You do a great job, so let's have some fun.
No, I appreciate it. And, we'll talk a little NBA basketball and Cavaliers, where obviously the big news was LeBron James decided to leave and go to L.A. Did that surprise you at all? I know covering the Cavaliers for as long as you have in your career, did you have an inkling that he was going to L.A.?
You kept hearing buzz about that from the moment the finals ended. And to be honest, I and a lot of people who cover the team didn't want to believe it because it didn't make sense. Why would you go to a team that has no chance, even if you were to spring one more max player and bring him in, no chance of even getting to the Western Conference Finals? And yet that's what he did, because this move was all about building brand LeBron and his post-career empire, and not about winning. And that's something that I think the emotions are hard to describe for a lot of Cleveland fans and myself. You know, you're kind of ticked because it negates a lot of what he said about, I'm all about winning, I'm all about championships. I've still got a couple years left in the prime of my career. That's all I want to do is win. Well, then you make this move, and you go to a team that is going to be a lower seed in the Western Conference with little chance of even advancing out of the first round unless they pull a rabbit out of their hat and can find another franchise player.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, and I've noticed as it's gone along farther and farther, he has probably 20 to 25 projects. And, he has a production company in LA, and they said having him out there would probably speed up the process with that. But he had 20 to 25 projects, whether it's TV, movie, anything he can get his hands on, it seems like, which I completely understand. But like you said, he mentioned about winning, and he held the Cavs' feet to the fire with 1-year contract to win now. And, I want to stay competitive. And he even said, I'm still in championship mode. But then he goes to L.A. and he signs a 4-year deal, which I believe it's a 3-year with an option for a fourth. And he says, we're in no rush to necessarily win, and, they're going to make moves. You've seen some of their moves now, but, he's not really forcing L.A. to get nuts. And they did make some signings with Rajon Rondo, Lance Stevenson, Miguel McGee, and some of those signings. But, I don't know, like you said, in the Western Conference, it's so tough with Golden State now signing DeMarcus Cousins, and the Rockets are still there. And there's really some good teams. I thought I was a little surprised that all of a sudden now he's kind of laid back, and maybe he's a little bit out of championship mode as he goes to LA, which they do have some young players and veterans, so that could be a good mix. And what do you think about the Lakers saying, you know what, we're going to change the style with LeBron and maybe put him in the low post and change the style of offense for him now and reinvent him a little bit?
That's another thing that really bothers me along the same lines of what we talked about with the lack of a chance at winning at all. He's not in that position yet. He can still flat out play. He's still the best player in the world, and you're going to pretty much take away half of his skill set by moving him there. I mean, the final phase of LeBron's career will be playing in the low post. That's been something that's been pretty obvious from really the day he entered the league, that he was going to start off as a point guard, gradually morph into a small forward, and then wind up like the heavily bloated Magic Johnson did at his end of the road as a power forward, but in this case a really talented power forward. Why do you do that? Why do you take him out of what is still, again, the best package, the best all-around skill set in the league, and you're going to do that? I don't have much use for the Lakers front office or for Luke Walton running a team either. So maybe that's just what they're saying because Luke Walton didn't sign on to coach a team with expectations until they bring in the next guy at mid-season. That's the best I can come up with because it also just doesn't make sense. Nothing about this makes sense as far as the on-court product.
Yeah, and it's funny. I think Luke Walton might be shaking in his pants a little bit because
Yep.
there's word that Ty Lue is going to talk to Luke Walton and how to coach a LeBron James team and give him some different ideas and tell him kind of what he went through coaching, the best player in the world, which I found was interesting because if I'm Ty Lue, I'm like, why would I? I'm sure he's friends with Luke Walton, but why would I want to help them now that they took our big time player?
I think it's more the personal relationship because
Yeah.
it's not a secret that Luke Walton has no idea what's about to hit him from the first day of training. And whether he's a good coach or not, and frankly the jury's very much out on that, any help that Ty can give him, and they are close friends, and Ty does respect the Lakers organization.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's goes to what kind of a person Ty Lue is. He really, truly is my favorite person to coach this team. He's a great guy. You love to be around him. The players love him because he's not afraid to get in their face and challenge them, but they also know he knows what he's doing. So, and unlike 8 years ago now, when the Cavaliers panicked to try and keep LeBron by firing Mike Brown, who would have been a really good coach to develop the young team that they wound up with the next year, they didn't make that knee-jerk move. They keep Ty on, and they've got a really good coach who should do a terrific job trying to develop some of these kids like Larry Nance Jr. So I think it's neat that Ty's kind of accepting this role as one of the young veterans who's willing to help other coaches. And he's got a great reputation around the league, kind of like a Dwayne Casey. Everybody loves him. The players love him. The front office loves him. And he certainly is fantastic to work with because if he thinks you're pulling BS on him, he'll tell you that. And it's kind of neat that he's got that give and take. As I said, I will always defend him because he really is just a first-rate person.
Yeah, and during the season, it seemed like, the media was a little harsh on Ty Lue and some of the fans maybe with, not knowing how to coach LeBron James and running the same offensive schemes and it's not working and he needs to change it up. But when I look back at it, I mean, how many different players did the Cavaliers have? Obviously it wasn't working with Isaiah Thomas and Jay Crowder and some of those guys. So then they make a mid-season move with Larry Nance and Clarkson and some of those guys. And I know people are saying, LA dishing out some of their salary to sign LeBron James. Was that a move by LeBron to say, oh yeah, you should get these young guys. We like them. I don't think it was, but, he gets young guys coming in and, a lot of different moving pieces it seemed like during the year for Ty Lue. And I thought he did a really good job. Some games, obviously, you're not going to be at your best. And he went through some things this year, but what do you think about him going through, some health issues and then coming back? And it seems like he's a little re-energized now.
He is. He caused a lot of people a lot of concern well before he took the medical leave, because when you would see him walking out of the arena when he thought no one was watching, or you get a peek into his office, he looked terrible from about December 1st on. I mean, he looked bad. He had no color in his face. He was bloated. You could tell he was physically exhausted when he was trying to wheel his bag out. So I'm actually glad that it wasn't anything more serious. And he is re-energized, both literally and figuratively, since he came back. And I think it'll really, really help him and the team because, again, he's a guy who went through so much stuff last season. He had some very terrible playoff games performance-wise, but look at that roster. That's what I kept telling people throughout the postseason when they were on him. I said, he's not having a great run with his strategies, but he's got two guys you can count on. Two in LeBron and Kevin Love. Look at the rest of that roster. You'd love to say, well, they're getting consistent production from Kyle Korver or J.R. Smith, but it never happened. They've got solid point guard play from George Hill. No, they didn't, and his defense is vastly overrated. So trying to figure out a team with two players and just a whole lot of spare pieces who you have to find lightning in a bottle the nights that they're playing well together, I don't think James Naismith could have done a better job with that team. I really don't. I think it's a miracle based on what LeBron did, and some of the moves that Ty made that worked out that this team got through. So again, he's probably in the same mood, frankly, that people like you and I are, Rob. It's almost tiring to cover this team for 9 months a year for the last 4 years, so a little break isn't the worst thing for anyone. Now then in a year when this team goes 20-62, you'll be like, oh, how could I think that? But everybody's just really tired, and that's why it's neat to see Ty so fired up and ready to coach these summer league players, and hopefully they can get a little lucky with some of the kids they've brought in, and this team can rally around the Kevin Loves and whichever other veterans are still with them come mid-October.
Yeah, and you've heard rumors about, obviously in the media they're saying, Kevin Love needs to be traded for, some assets, but it seems like Kobe Altman, the GM of the Cavaliers, are saying, we're going to probably hold on to him unless we get a really good package for him. What's your ideas with this Cavaliers team? What is their next move here? Because is there any free agents they can sign?
No.
You look at what they have now. It sounds like they're going to keep the majority of these guys. They have veterans. They have some young guys with Colin Sexton, who's been doing really good. Zizic, the center for the Cavs in summer league, is pairing it up with Chetty Osman. Those guys look good in summer league. Obviously, it's just summer league, but do you see them making any kind of moves in this off season?
They're stuck, and that was why the prevailing thought amongst people around the team was that LeBron was probably going to leave unless they could do a deal between the draft and July 1st where they could bring in another player to be not necessarily a big three guy, but just kind of another anchor to help this team. And when it didn't happen, that sealed the fate. But they have little to no options. They're still in a position where if they add anybody else, they're going to be in the luxury tax. And at some point, you need to take a year and just say, okay, we're not going to do that for a year because everything resets and you don't get the punitive penalties to where you're basically paying $4 for every 1 year over the tax to the league, to the fund.
Mm-hmm.
This would be a perfect year to do that, and that appears to be their strategy. The worst thing any team can do in the NBA is bottoming out and trying to reset to zero. It never works. You have to get, it's like winning the lottery in real life, not the NBA lottery, over and over and over again to make it work. You win through trades, you win through free agency. This is a year where, by all accounts, Kobe Altman, and fortunately, Dan Gilbert has agreed this time, unlike 2010, where they're going to say, all right, we're going to try to be a 7 or 8 seed in the East, sustain this culture that we have to get into the playoffs and at least keep that going and not bottom out. Because we've seen what Dan Gilbert does when he bottom out, and it's not pretty. I'm not sure there's a single person outside of Dan Gilbert's family who has confidence in his ability to rebuild a team. So trying to maintain some semblance of success while really looking ahead to next year when you've got contracts you can take off the books and hopefully build, 2 years down the road you're looking at trying to make a run at a 4 or a 5 seed. And honestly, that's probably the best you can ever hope for. But with the East being just the worst conceivable collection of 15 teams, it might be good enough to stay competitive. That's the only blessing about LeBron leaving, is it's made a bad conference just horrendous.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And, the Celtics obviously are going to be strong. The Toronto Raptors might not be bad, but the rest of the league seems like, it's, obviously the 76ers are going to be there with a young squad that they wanted LeBron James to get them over the hump.
And Indiana. Don't forget Indiana.
That's right. Yeah. And Indiana, they could surprise some people and take over the East.
You're darn right.
Just never, because, they ran into obviously a little buzzsaw in going 7 games with the Cavs who made it to the finals. So, like you said, it's going to be interesting to see how this Cavs team gel and what kind of new offense Ty Lue comes up with, because he's already been talking about Kevin Love being the center piece of the offense.
And he can do that. He can do that very effectively. If you look at what he did in Minnesota on some bad teams that were just under the playoff range, he can get you 5 assists a game. You can make sure he gets 1 or 2 touches every time you set up in your half-court offense. And that's going to be kind of fun to watch. In a best case scenario, you can envision him kicking the ball out to JR or Korver and getting a lot of open shots for them. And honestly, if JR is still here this year, we've kind of joked about that, other writers and myself, saying, just imagine how much fun it's going to watch JR uncensored this year, where they aren't trying to win a championship, so he can just do what he wants. And it's
that's true.
It is an entertainment business in addition to athletics, and that could be very interesting. As long as the team is competitive and can find its way around the periphery of the playoff race at the very worst, it could be interesting to watch some of these kids develop. And they really do believe, by the way, that Larry Nance is someone who will be a major part of their future, and that's where they're trying to work on a contract extension now, just to make sure he doesn't hit restricted free agency in a year. One other thing, the biggest asset this team has, and it's something that wasn't apparent when the trades were made at midseason, but George Hill's contract is for 2 years, but the second year is a $1 million team buyout. So the good news is George Hill at this point is essentially a ghost on their roster, where he is much more valuable as a guy with 1 year left on his contract than an actual point guard. And he's making a ton of money at about $16 million a year. They definitely could, if a contender feels that George Hill can be a real good backup point guard or push them to 5 more wins around the trade deadline, he'll be gone, and they should be able to bring in a young asset. And that is the case where you would look at a young asset or even draft picks, just anything to turn a guy who's not going to be part of the solution here at this point into something that can help you.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think when it comes up to the trade deadline, I think, there could be a few moves depending on the record and if they're competing for a playoff spot. But what do you think about, Atlanta obviously gets the Cavs' number 1 pick. It's top 10 protected. So if it's outside, the top 10 pick, Atlanta would get it. And a lot of people are saying, that could be, an asset where if you're in still, the top 10, you get to retain that pick instead of giving it up, and then Atlanta wouldn't get anything. That's when we say, if you make the playoffs, obviously they give up that pick. But, I think like you brought up a great point. You can't bottom up out. We tried that. We had Kyrie Irving here, and, the Cavs were nothing more than a 20-win team.
Right.
So
and look at Detroit, by the way, the example right by us. Detroit decided that they were going to blow things up and just build around Andre Drummond and look to the future. They're no closer to a playoff spot right now than they were the moment they bottomed out. That's the danger. And we saw it with the Jim Paxson bottom out with the Cavaliers. It doesn't work. And once you say that, you're basically saying, well, minimum 5 years, you're not going to sniff the playoffs, and you're going to put just a garbage product and expect fans to pay crazy prices for it. It doesn't work, and I'm delighted that Dan Gilbert appears to be all in on doing the right thing now, unlike the wrong thing he did in 2010 by doing that.
Yeah.
By the way, the one other thing you mentioned, Rob, that was a good point. With Toronto made the same knee-jerk move this year that the Cavs did in 2010, where you fire your coach instead of waiting a couple months to see how things shake out. Because if they have Dwayne Casey, you'd have to say they're a heavy favorite to win the East next year right now, because Boston's going to have all sorts of chemistry issues next year. And then with Kyrie and Rozier and a bunch of guys in the last year of their contracts, that's not going to turn out well for them in terms of chemistry. So Toronto blew it, just like the Cavs did in 2010 by firing a coach earlier than they should have. And now there's talk that they may move DeRozan. And those are the guys where if you're a team like the Cavs, you're going to be able to take on a guy like DeRozan who's in the neighborhood of $30 million a year, because Thompson and Smith will be heading into the last year of their contracts in 2019. In a perfect world, that's how you kind of rebuild quickly and get yourself back into a 4 or 5 seed position. No guarantee any of this happens, but it's a lot better than saying, all right, well, we're going to play Sexton and Zizic and Osman 40 minutes a game and just see what happens.
No, that's a great point, and really never even thought about that. But, and that's the funny thing is you look at Toronto, and Dwayne Casey's a great coach. He always got them in the playoffs. They were the number 1 seed last year. And if you think about it, in game 1, the Cavaliers won it was almost a crazy game because Toronto should have won that. They had 3 chances for a layup. in the last seconds, and then LeBron made also a buzzer beater in Cleveland for the win. So there were two games that could have went either way.
Exactly.
And you just never know. But moving on from the Cavs, and now you look at the Lakers a little bit. They made some moves to bring in. We talked a few veterans to surround some of the young talent. Kyle Kuzma, Lonzo Ball still there. Do you like some of the moves that the Lakers have made now that they were able to sign LeBron James?
I think to try and become the third best team in the West, they made some moves that make sense, as long as you let LeBron be LeBron and keep him running the offense and doing everything he does. I really like the Rondo pickup. Really like the Rondo pickup. Because if nothing else, he's going to be able to take the ball out of LeBron's hands. And it sounds silly, but it really is true to have someone who can just bring the ball up the court. Save LeBron or whoever your franchise player is that 47 feet of dribbling, sometimes under pressure, makes a huge difference. And we see that on the high school level. The good coaches at the high school level will find a way to have other guys bring it up or through a series of lengthy cross-court passes. It saves wear and tear. It does a lot of good things. The Lance Stevenson move makes no sense to me because it's not an act. He and LeBron do not like each other at all. And JaVale McGee is, you look up the definition of head case, he is very high on the list. I know you've got to sign veterans for the minimum and guys who know their role and just want to play with LeBron and play in Los Angeles, but it just doesn't seem like the recipe for success. It actually feels like the Cavaliers bringing in Dwayne Wade and Derrick Rose last year, guys who are on the very downside of their career trying to steal a ring, or in this case, steal some wins in a modest playoff run. But they had no other choice, much like the Cavs last offseason. So what are you going to do? You just deal it. And I do like Kyle Kuzma a lot.
I think they got some good young talent. I mean, Lonzo Ball could be decent. It's funny, he leaked out his injury a little bit, and I thought he was injury prone a little bit last year. And they, like you said, they have some good young talent. Rondo has consistently been that guy that can dribble the ball, dish it out. He's not a great shooter. And Lance Stevenson's a streaky guy, but you have some good young talent there that maybe they can help him out a little bit. But I don't know if Lance Stevenson's the guy that you want these young guys to really learn from. Especially we've seen him and LeBron get into it on the court where he called them cheap, when he comes and hits guys in the face and stuff.
Yeah. I got to spend a lot of time around Lance Stevenson this postseason in particular, primarily covering the Pacers side, pre- and post-game, and then covering the games in Indiana. I don't know if he's a truly changed man off the court, but all the true young up-and-coming stars like the Miles Turners on that team, the Victor Oladipo, legitimately loved having him around because it wasn't necessarily what he did on the court, but they kind of needed a policeman. And the fact that he was your policeman and keeping guys in line is staggering.
Wow.
But maybe it's like, a hockey reference, Phil Kessel in Pittsburgh or J.R. Smith in Cleveland. There's always been something about Lance Stevenson in Indianapolis where it just worked. And it shouldn't have in any of the cases, but it did. So that actually is a bigger blow for the Pacers in my mind than it is a positive asset for the Lakers. But he's not going to let the Ball family get away with their crap. LeBron's not going to let them get away with their crap. So I guess that's the other way they're looking at that. One more thing about Rondo. I don't think people appreciate how great this guy is in terms of running an offense and his career assist numbers. If your listeners just take a minute to look up Rondo over his career, they're almost mind-boggling. They really are for a guy who, as you said, cannot shoot at all from the field, from the line, beyond the arc. But he's run an offense as well as almost anybody in the history of the league in a number of different settings with a number of different teams. And he's a weird dude. They claim he's brilliant off the court. His teachers and all. He certainly doesn't come across that way when you interview him. But again, that's kind of one of those stealth moves that really I'm kind of excited about watching LeBron play with him because he is a true point guard, and LeBron hasn't played with very many of those at all.
Yeah, I'm interested, like you said, to watch the Lakers and kind of see what they do with that team because it's going to be an interesting year in the NBA, that's for sure. And in other news. Golden State, they signed DeMarcus Cousins. I'll tell you what, there have been so many comments on social media, and to me, I don't know, with Golden State and going this way, I don't know if it's a good thing for the league. And that's my question to you. With Golden State, they got Kevin Durant. You thought that would be enough. And then DeMarcus Cousins, who said nobody wanted him, which might be true. We don't know with his injury. Do you think, like with Golden State getting all these superstars, do you think that hurts the league at all when you get teams like that to continue to win and continue to make it into the finals?
In my mind, the DeMarcus Cousins signing is the tipping point. I actually had no problem with Kevin Durant did. I mean, as a lifelong champion, I thought it sucked.
Yeah.
But, that's why you have free agency. He wants to play there, and the great players on that team, like Curry for a year and Thompson has taken less than he could make. It's just part of what you deal with. You can't change it. But for DeMarcus Cousins to go there, to give them 5 All-Stars, and the best center in the league in Cousins, this one really rubs me wrong. And I don't care about what little Cousins was willing to play for. I think Adam Silver has paid no attention to the on-court product from the moment he got this job. And the league has now become what so many people incorrectly labeled the mid-'90s, where they blame David Stern for the Hollywoodization and not worrying about basketball. Well, the truth is it wasn't. It was an easy, pithy comment to make if you didn't follow the league. Now it's become that, and this has become the moment of truth. Something will need to be done, whether it's a hard salary cap, whether it's eliminating the myriad exceptions that teams can have. But, I mean, there's no team that can beat him. That wasn't the case with just Durant on the team. But now, there's no reason to play this season. There just isn't. And the great thing about basketball in my mind when you have a series, a best of 7 series, the best team always wins. Nobody can cry or make excuses. The best team always wins. Well, unfortunately, there's no doubt who the best team is. I mean, at this point, the Warriors could lose one of their star players, and still there's not a chance anybody outside of Houston could even beat them. I think this is the point, Rob. Something needs to be done.
No, I agree. And, granted, DeMarcus Cousins probably won't be there until January or, in time for the playoffs. But if he's there for the playoffs, I mean, can you imagine, him in the starting 5? It's, Team USA basketball or, just a team of all-stars, basically. I mean, when you have Kevin Durant, Klay Thompson, and I'll give them credit. They did draft Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, and Draymond Green. But to me, Draymond Green is a good player, but I think he's a little overrated. As we saw, teams are leaving him wide open for threes, and sometimes he'll hit them and sometimes he won't. But overall, Klay Thompson and Steph Curry, they can hit from anywhere on the floor. Durant, anywhere on the floor. When you have 3 guys of that nature, it's really tough to win. So it's going to be interesting to see, how that team does. Obviously, they're going to be right there. And I said the same thing. I mean, they made it to the championship this year, and I mean, Steph Curry didn't even have a great game against the Cavs, and Klay Thompson had an on and off game, and they still continue to win. But with Oklahoma City, I was surprised Paul George re-signed with them. I thought for sure that it was setting up him going to the Lakers. Instead, he signed with the Thunder, and the Thunder are going to probably buy out Carmelo Anthony. Do you see, what did you think first about the Oklahoma City Thunder re-signing Paul George, and then where do you think Carmelo Anthony can end up?
You and I have followed sports closely for our entire lives, so we can see this kind of the 30,000-foot view. From the moment Paul George came into the league, he wanted to play for the Los Angeles Lakers. There was he wasn't even shy about that. Much like there were always people in LeBron's camp who said, well, his perfect place would either be the Lakers or the Knicks. And it's kind of shocking that LeBron never wound up with the Knicks on the same level just because of the market size. For Paul George to go from Indiana, where he felt things were a little too sleepy, to Oklahoma City and to develop a remarkable friendship with Russell Westbrook that keeps him there for multiple years, I mean, you couldn't have even gotten odds on him being with that team, especially because they did not go far in the playoffs. That's actually probably the coolest story of the offseason in the league, that it is about winning to Paul George, and it is about trying to build something long-term there with Westbrook and they're very good role players. That's the way the salary cap's supposed to work, not the DeMarcus Cousins example. You're supposed to have the opportunity to keep your own guys when you bring them in. And, the Anthony situation, I used to think that he was going to become someone that we debated if he was underrated or overrated down the road. But it's become pretty obvious the last 3 years that he's just a shameless scorer along the lines of like an Adrian Dantley was decades ago, where he's not a winner. He'll never win anything, and you really don't want him around despite his remarkable gifts when he was young. And now Anthony, where's he going to wind up? You keep hearing when the buyout is consummated, he wants to play with either banana boat buddy LeBron or banana boat buddy Dwayne Wade. And it's not about winning. He just wants to play with his buddies. And again, I'm fine with that. Kind of with the Durant signing. I'm fine with that. If that's what you want to do, you're a free agent. But boy, that's for Paul George to still be there and Carmelo Anthony to not be imminently. That's another development you never thought would happen.
And do you think if he went to the Lakers, would that be a good fit for him? You look at LeBron's there. I mean, he could be more of a scorer. I think it would be actually a pretty good fit considering, you have Rondo who's not a shooter, and then you look at Lance Stevenson who's a little inconsistent. You put Carmelo in there, and maybe him and LeBron could be mostly the focal points of that offense there.
Considering their limited options, it would be a win-win for both sides. And if it doesn't work out, you just dispatch him at midseason or trade him. So to me, that does kind of make sense because there are so many teams that are right up against the massive luxury tax bills. The Lakers aren't one of them. So, I like that idea. And by the way, that's the other fascinating thing about Oklahoma City, that Oklahoma City, because of what they'll have to pay Carmelo on a buyout, currently will have when the season starts, the richest payroll and the largest luxury tax bill in the history of the league, topping the Cavaliers and Nets, respectively, in recent seasons.
Well, Brian, I appreciate you taking time to talk to us a little basketball, NBA, and Cavs tonight. And one last question before I let you go. How do you think the Cavs are going to do? I've watched a little summer league. Some of the young talent is there. Do you think this team, with the mixed players that we have, you think the roster will stay the same going into the season? Obviously, it's far away, but it's going to be interesting to see developments of Kobe Altman and what he's going to do with this team. Do you think this team really can win coming up in the season?
I think they need to make one or two tweaks because, in my mind, they're probably like a 10 seed if you break down the roster right now.
Yeah.
With the potential to get better, but they are what they are at this stage unless these kids develop. One name, and you brought him up briefly earlier, is Ante Zizic. When Ante Zizic and Jetty Osman were overseas, the belief by the few international scouts that I trust was that Zizic was nearly ready to play a regular role in the NBA, and his ceiling is much higher than Jetty's. And you saw, just glimpses of that when he got some run in meaningful games at mid-season, just a couple. You're seeing that in the summer league now. That's, just tuck that in the back of your mind, because when Ante got some run, that popped back in my mind that's what had been said, and you could see it because his body is NBA ready. And he's not a dummy. He only shoots layups and dunks, which is the same reason with Larry Nance's effectiveness. But still, you can't take away a guy who shoots 70% is not unwilling to foul and use his enormous frame and is still growing into it. That's a potential game changer. And the other game changer is, it's not been a secret the Cavaliers were willing to trade Tristan or JR for the last 2 full years, and nobody's wanted them.
Yeah.
Maybe someone desperate for a big or a shooter come late January decides they're going to bite the bullet on their what would be at that point a year and a half left on their contracts. Those are the other options that potentially could make this team better. But I think watching George Hill, if they can turn him into something, you could battle for a playoff spot with this team as it's presently constructed.
Well, even without LeBron, it's still going to be fun to see what this Cavs team does, and if they can, win without LeBron. Eventually, we knew this was going to happen, so now we just have to do it. And Dan Gilbert obviously isn't afraid to spend
Right.
Altman's not afraid to make moves, so it's going to be a fun offseason. We'll see what happens.
And Kobe has always been a very approachable, likable guy who's got his head screwed on straight, and his assistant Brock Aller also has been that way. They both worked themselves up from very low positions throughout the years, and at least outwardly they haven't changed. They've got their plan, and it's not the old square peg into a round hole like so many analytics teams do. They've got an idea that they know how to build a team within the parameters of the modern NBA, and that to me is also exciting. It's not a situation where you've thrown a retread in there and a bad strategy. And they also know that obviously 2 years from now, when the renovations are done and a lot of these season ticket plans expire, you're going to need to sell tickets. So it's kind of a 2-year work in progress, and it could be very entertaining. I hope it is. My fingers are crossed because bad basketball is bad basketball. But I think they've got a shot. And with the Indians' window really only being open for another year and a half at most, they know the business. They know the off-court side, how important it is. So God willing, we'll have some more fun again someday.
Well, Brian, we appreciate you coming on. Absolutely great stuff. It's always great to talk to you, and thanks for joining us here on Sports on Tap.
Hey, you too. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right, you too, Brian. Thanks for joining us. That's Brian Dulik, three-time Associated Press best sports columnist in Ohio and a contributing writer for the Associated Press and sports writer for the Medina Gazette. I want to thank Brian Dulik for joining us. We're Sports on Tap. We'll be right back with more right after this, live from Z's Cream and Bean.